So hi, good morning. Well, it is here anyway. Lovely sunny day. Today we're going to be talking about why I changed from Nikon to Sony and then from Sony back to Nikon. The reason I'm doing this is I just spent about half an hour going through the comments on my YouTube channel and seeing what people were asking, what they were talking about. And I've had a lot of people ask, why did I change to Sony? And sometimes the same people and sometimes other people asking, why did I change from Sony back to Nikon? So I thought that story might be interesting for you to get my perspective as a wedding photographer, why I'm absolutely super happy with my Z5 and my D780 for what I do, which is weddings and families and portraits and boudoir and that sort of thing. So let me explain. And we will be popping into Lightroom shortly to have a look at the image quality, because that's one of the things. But I'll also be talking about the other aspects as well. So the story is, back in 2018, I was using a D750. Probably did, I think, about 25 to 30 weddings. And during 2018, I think it was the early part of 2018, Sony came out with the A7 III. And that really was groundbreaking. It was an instant, overnight, huge success. It did everything that I, as a wedding photographer, could possibly want. Lots of frames per second, silent shutter, a good range of lenses, 24 megapixels, hugely customizable, and of course, face and eye autofocus, and 2 cards. So all the way through 2018, I was kind of thinking, well, maybe it's time to switch to mirrorless. Nikon, sometime during the year, I think probably the middle of the year, started to talk about their Z6 and Z7 cameras, their first attempt at mirrorless. And I really wanted to stay with Nikon if I could. So I waited and I waited, got to the end of the wedding season, probably October, and started to look much more seriously. And it must have been end of October, November time, Nikon actually released the Z6 and the Z7, and my camera store, the newest one to me, is in Norwich, Wicks. I went up there and I played with the Z6 for half an hour and was hugely disappointed, actually. One card slot, first of all, pretty well made it a non-starter for me as a wedding photographer. There is no way I'm risking all of my photos on one card. I know it's never going to go wrong until it does, and then I will have lost a whole wedding, and I just can't do that. So that was a non-starter. I believe, don't bother correcting me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it had face detect but not eye autofocus to start with. The face detect was, yeah, it was okay, but detecting someone's face is only any good if they're 20 or 30 feet away. If they get much closer than that and you've got a 50 or 85mm lens on, you're going to want eye autofocus. So the face detect for me really, from a practical standpoint, wasn't much good. Otherwise, I liked the camera. I loved the EVF. It had silent shutter and that kind of stuff as well. So I liked it, but not enough. It wasn't the right tool for the job for me at the time. They had the Sony A7 III there as well. Picked that up, and obviously got wonderful face detect, wonderful eye autofocus, a good range of lenses, as I said. So I went home and thought about it and decided that now was the time to change. Nikon had no new offerings as far as DSLRs go. My D750 was really about the only choice. I didn't want an 850, too many megapixels. Didn't want a huge, great D5 or anything like that. So I didn't really have much in the way of options if I wanted to change. Otherwise, just stick with the D750, which, by the way, I was very, very happy with. But it didn't do silent shooting. It didn't have face and eye autofocus. It was time to get up to date. So I did. I sold most of my Nikon gear, bought the A7 III, and it coincided with a time in my wedding photography when I wanted to change from using zoom lenses, which I used a lot. Probably the only prime lens I used really was maybe the 85 1.8 for a few portrait shots, and the 50 1.8 for very, very few other shots. It was mainly a 24 to 70 lens that I used, or an 18 to 35. Decided I wanted to move a lot more to prime lenses, so bought the Sony, bought a 35, a 50 and an 85 prime lenses, all 1.4s, 2 Sigma, and one, the 50mm, was a Samyang. It was Samyang's first attempt at an autofocus lens, and I didn't keep it very long. It was pretty clunky. They have now updated it fairly recently, so then changed that to also to a Sigma. So I had 3 Sigma lenses, all Sigma art lenses. I'd kept, on the Sony side, I'd kept my D700 and a couple of lenses as a backup, not as a second camera, but I took those along to a wedding just in case the Sony completely packed up, because I didn't have another Sony camera. And I can shoot an entire wedding with a D700 with 50mm lens on it. It's not a problem. I could certainly do that if I really have to. So I started shooting with the Sony, and I had expected it to be a bit of an uphill challenge. I didn't expect to just pick the Sony up and start using it like I did my Nikons, but I didn't expect it to be as hard as it was. A part of the problem, and this also applies to Nikon mirrorless cameras, and I'm sure to Canon as well, there's a lot more options. I can pick a D700 up and there's maybe 3 options, 3 things I might adjust for this shoot, and that's it. I wouldn't bother changing anything else. With the Sony, I had 30 or 40 things that I could change. I didn't know if I should change them. What difference did they make? So for months, and I'm talking, I don't know, 10, 12 weddings probably, every time I went to a wedding, I had the camera set up differently to try and find out what the best way to use this camera was. So that was hard work. It made photography very difficult for me. And it took, if you like, it took my eye off the ball. Rather than concentrating on the photo and the you know, creating a great photo, I was fiddling with the camera and what should I do if this, and just taking whatever shots I could get. So that wasn't a great time. Another thing with the Sony is it's, in my view, a bit too customizable. If we go to the Z5, for instance, we've got an ISO button. I think you're always going to want to be able to change the ISO, and pressing that button and using the front dial or the rear dial to go from auto to not auto, and the rear dial to change the actual ISO. You're going to need that button. On Sony, I think, if I remember rightly, practically everything was programmable. So although that was the ISO button, you could change it to whatever you wanted to. And I experimented with using different buttons, different layouts. And especially on the focusing, I found it a problem, because although it had very good face and eye autofocus, sometimes, not because of the camera, but just because of the situation, that didn't work. If you've got 5 or 6 people, and yes, I know you can you can do face recognition, you can take someone, you can register that face as a number 1, number 2 and number 3, so it should pick that up. Didn't always do it. If it's not 100%, then are you really going to risk it? So I experimented with lots of different ways of using AF, and I had 3 buttons set up for different types of autofocus, and it was really quite complicated. Also, the actual handling of the camera, it just didn't feel right. It was slightly smaller than the Z5, only a few millimeters, but those few millimeters seem to make a big difference. The button layout, not a million miles off, but not quite in the right place sometimes. And so as far as using it, it was okay. But as I say, I actually bought a plate to go on the bottom, across the bottom there, which I don't need on the Z5, to stop my finger falling off the bottom, and it did make it a bit more comfortable. So by the time I got to the end of 2019, my first year of using it, I was okay with it, which then brought me on to the second problem with Sony, and that was the image quality. I didn't really notice in the first few months because I was so involved in trying to get the camera to do what I wanted it to do, and use it in the way that I was happy with. But after that, I started to look more at the image quality and started to compare some of the shots back to my D750 shots. And I didn't actually like, and I still don't, like the look that I got from the Sony. Now, remember, I had Sigma Art lenses on, and I'd used a Sigma Art lens on my D750, I think the year before. I think I had a 135, I think, Sigma Art lens, and that showed me that Sigma lenses have a certain look. Very clean, very sharp, very kind of optically perfect. And for me, that lacks character, to be honest. I didn't try any Sony lenses. They're a bit too expensive to start swapping lenses around. So I stuck with the Sigma lenses. But I'm pretty sure from videos that I've seen, and examples of image quality and lens comparisons, that the Sigma is, from an image quality point of view, quite similar to Sony. Samyang, which I'd say I had the 50mm, was very similar as well. So I think it's to do with the camera lens combination, and whatever you put on there is going to give you a similar sort of look. Didn't have the character that I had with Nikon. I wasn't mad on the colours, and it just, for me, it just lacked something. It was too perfect, too crisp, too sharp. And it was like a kind of smartphone on steroids. And the other thing, I feel that a Nikon camera, and I'm sure it applies to Canon as well, is designed by photographers for photographers. I got the feeling that Sony is designed by lab technicians and computer boffins because they can. Not because you need it, not because it's going to help a photographer, but simply, we've got this, we can shove this into the camera, let's do it. And that was my impression of Sony. So by the time 2020 arrived, I'd kind of already decided that if I could change to Nikon, I would do. And I think by this time they'd updated the Z6 to have much better eye autofocus and face detect, and so from that point of view it was a lot better. Still only had one card slot, so I still wasn't keen on changing to the Z6, but they had brought out the D7iii, and that grabbed my attention, and I thought maybe I could get the D7iii, because that would give me the best of both worlds. I've DSLR, which I love, optical viewfinder, but all the benefits of a Z6 on the rear screen, best of both worlds. And then of course 2020, you remember what happened, don't you? A thing called COVID came along. My weddings were decimated, my expected income was gone, and it just wasn't the right time to change my whole camera system again. So I went through 2020 with the Sony, doing the few weddings that I had, and the weddings I had were reduced from full day weddings to sort of 2 or 3 hour weddings, so not a lot to get too excited about. And then we started to progress. We got towards the end of 2020, talk about the vaccine, 2021 looking a lot more hopeful. And most of my weddings that had been postponed from 2020 were moved to 2021. it looked like it was going to be super busy, and it was. So at the end of 2020, decided now would be the right time to change. So I sold the Sony. I got the D780. Again, I wanted to use prime lenses, and I bought 35 1.8, 50 1.8 and 85 1.8, I think, to start with. I already had the 18 to 35, so I had all the lenses I needed to go off and do weddings. But I only had the D780. I did have the D700, of course, as a backup. The moment I picked up the D780, I was in heaven. I was smiling for days, because it was just so good to get back to having a proper camera. The D780 is still the camera that I love the most that I've ever had. It just does everything. It does it well. It does it easily. It is truly a brilliant camera. And as I say, it's a DSLR. And on those occasions I want silent shutter or face detect, hit one button and I've got a completely different camera. Super. And I got back the image quality I wanted. Well, nearly got the image quality I wanted. And so through last year, 2021, I did experiment a lot with lenses, which has now got me to the point I am now. So the Z5, actually the Z5, I've just got the 28 2.8 lens, which is going to give me my really small camera for mingling with the guests, because I want to be able to walk around and just talk to people, and maybe even have the camera just here, hit back button focus, take a shot, it's on silent, don't even know I've done it. And I can get super candid, 100% candid shots. They're not going to know they're being photographed. And the reason I want that is because normally, if I go up to someone with this guy, and I've got this here, they're not going to be themselves. They're going to do some silly pose, or they're going to freeze, or they're just not going to look as natural as standing there with this thing, and they don't even realise I'm taking shots. So that works brilliantly. Sometimes it'll have the 28mm on, sometimes the 58. So the lenses I've now got, and that are going to be my wedding lenses for this year. The 85, no, yes, the 85 1.4, portraits, couple headshots, candid shots from a bit further away, maybe during the evening, people are sitting at a table and that kind of stuff, and I don't want to get in their face, I don't want to sit at the table, I want to stand back a bit and get really quite close-up shots of them. 85 is long enough, perfect, brilliant lens. The 58 is going to live mostly on the D780, because my setup is actually going to be the 58 on the D780 and the 28 on the Z5. Most of my day will be spent like that. I've also got the 24 to 70, just in case. I don't like using the zoom lens. It's there if I need it. I've got the 18 to 35 for the really wide shots, and I'll take a few of those. What else we got? 35 1.8. I don't think that's going to get much use at all, actually. Okay, so that's my setup now, and I'm absolutely happy with it. Let's look at the image quality, because everyone says, oh, Sony, image quality is good. A few people complain about the colours, and the low light performance is great, and and if anything, you would get the impression that the Sony low light performance and noise and that sort of thing is probably better than Nikon. Certainly better than the Z5, possibly as good as, or maybe even better than the 780. I disagree. Nikon 780 and Z5 is better, and I mean technically better, not just image quality, but technically better than Sony. We'll nip into Lightroom and I will show you two pictures and explain why I believe that's the case. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom. And what I've done, let me just explain what I've done. This is the, let's go back to single images. This is a Sony image shot with a 50mm 1.4 art lens at a wedding very much towards the end of 2019. Shot at 1/25 ISO 400. Now it was shot at 1.4 and I tried to find a similar shot on my Nikon 58 1.4 to do a direct comparison. The nearest I can get is this one, which is 1/60th at ISO 720, so nearly twice the ISO at f2. You'll notice it's also on the Z5. It's not the D780, so this is the Z5. And without going into all the aesthetics and we'd need to look at some different shots to really get a feel of how the image quality, the character is different. And I'm afraid you'll just have to take my word that I prefer Nikon to Sony, and that's obviously a personal preference. But this is about the actual image quality. So if we go back to the Sony shot, it is at 1.4 and therefore you wouldn't expect it to be as sharp as it is possible to get, but Sigma lenses are renowned for their sharpness at 1.4 wide open. This is 100% zoom when it finally renders, and I've got no sharpening, no noise reduction and no colour noise reduction. Just look at this shot for a couple of seconds. I hope you can see it on your screen okay. There is, even at 400 ISO, we do have quite a bit of noise, and it's okay sharpness. I've got no complaints, but it's not fantastic. Now I can obviously whack the sharpening up and make it somewhat sharper, but you'll also notice when I do that we have a lot of noise come into the shot. So if we do the same with the Nikon, I'll give this a chance to pop into focus. Right, first of all, it's sharper. Okay, I know it's at f2, so you would maybe expect that, but it is a lot sharper. Bear in mind we've got almost twice the ISO, 720, and I really don't need to apply any sharpening. It's plenty good enough, and I really don't see any noise in that at all. I don't even need to put any noise reduction on. Certainly back on the Sony shot, even at ISO 400, I really needed to get the sort of shot I wanted to do some noise reduction. So what I'm going to do now is just pause the video for a few seconds, and I'm going to edit each photo as I would do if I was giving this to a client. Okay, so I've edited this, and I'm really just talking about the sharpening and noise reduction, not the actual colours or anything else. But I've added some sharpening to the Nikon shot, and a little bit of noise reduction, as you can see around about here. And with the noise reduction, I pushed the detail up to these levels here, and the contrast and the smoothness at this level here. That sort of setting is giving me what I think is the best shot. I don't see any noise in here, so I'd be very happy with that. As let's just go back to normal size, he says. As an image, yeah, I'd be happy to give that to the client. This shot with the Sony, I've played around with for a lot longer. The Nikon shot, I probably spent, I don't know, 15-20 seconds playing around with it to get it to where I wanted it to be. This one, I've spent 5 or 6 minutes on this, and this is about as good as I can get it. A lot more sharpening, which obviously gives you more problems with noise reduction, so I've had to whack that right up and have these settings here, and that is the best I can get it, and that is nowhere near as good as the Nikon shot. From this distance it looks fine, but obviously if they decided to have this one printed as a 20x16 print or something, that, you know, that level of detail could become a problem. So that's my take. Sony does not have better image quality than Nikon, even the Z5, which some people have knocked for not being particularly good quality. But remember, this has got the D750 sensor in, and couple that with a 58 1.4G lens, you know, a wonderful lens. You do get some fabulous shots, and I much prefer it to Sony. I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions, obviously let me know, and I will get back to you. But I hope you found that useful. Enjoy your photography. Cheers for now.